Hello and welcome to the Online Wine Tasting Club, the Adventure series for our Fortified Wine Christmas special. And this is definitely the time of year to be drinking some fortified wines.
It is. Anywhere between -6 and -11 is a wonderful time.
You need something to warm you up.
A little bit icy getting in here.
Yeah, I mean, it's so cold in the warehouse that when we went in there just to try to sort out some wines, I think we lasted about, was it 5 minutes before we had to go and stand next to the radiator like a rotisserie chicken, sort of going slowly around and around. But anyway, it is lovely to be here to share some really cool wines with you today, and wines that don't get love all year round.
I think so. And, fortified wines, I think, there's kind of, it does scream kind of holidays and Christmas and cold weather, but these kind of wines can be seen all year round. And I think there's the point that you really don't see them that often, and some of them get a bit of a bad rap. You talk about certain, the bottle of port or the bottle of sherry comes out of your grandfather's, cupboard Christmas. You have a little nip of it, it goes back in, and then you've got to dust the cobwebs off it. You feel that crunch as you take the top off or the cork out. But and yes, this is an absolutely fantastic time of year for these styles of wine. But as we go through these, there's wines in here that you can have a little bit chilled in the summer, fresh. So and they're all different styles. Even we've got two different ports. A Tawny versus an LBV. We've got some Australian dessert wine. We've got an Argentinian Malbec, a little bit of Vermouth, which usually you've withheld for cocktails, but you can drink it by itself there.
You can.
And we're going to start off with a little bit of sherry.
We are, and indeed, I think before we have a little video that goes into some of the different techniques. We'll go back through all of the differences between sherries and ports and all these other kinds of things as we go through the tasting. But I think it's important to say, what is a fortified wine? A fortified wine is a wine which has its alcoholic strength increased by adding a grape spirit, normally a grape spirit like brandy into it, to stop the fermentation or just to help preserve that wine and keep it in great condition as it got shipped all around the world. So if I'm studying on my WSET, the Wine and Spirit Trust wine exams, level 1 or level 2, we ask, what is a sherry? And a sherry is
a fortified wine.
A fortified wine. And so fortified wines, generally speaking, around about like that sort of maybe 20% alcohol by volume.
Yeah, you go, real fortified, probably the lower end, 17, 17.5, going up to about 22 is kind of the range. Yeah. But most of them are that 19, 20 kind of number.
So what's this one, mate?
Less. So we are doing a... You found that here. That's really tickled me.
I've been planning that since the moment I got in the car this morning.
What? Less. Well done. So this is a dry sherry. So this is Sandeman's Don Fino, non-vintage from Jerez. So to be a sherry, you have to come from that particular region. And sherry is something that is really, really interesting because I think there's what people think sherry is. And then everything else around it.
For example, they might think it's a fortified wine, especially if they've done their WSET level 1 or 2 wine exam.
You're obsessed with this, aren't you? You're obsessed with it. So what we've got here, and we'll go through this quickly and we'll do the tasting notes when we come back from the video. So we've got this dry sherry made with a Palomino grape. So and sherry comes in different styles and different kind of like levels of sweetness. So you start with your dry sherry. So this is the Fino. You then have a Manzanilla, which is same kind of style, but comes from a particular region in sherry, San Luca de Barrameda. And you find that's a little bit more savoury, a little bit more salinity to it. We then go into what are our biologically aged sherries. So these are your olorosos and your amontillados. And these are where you have this big, thick layer of yeast that sits on the top of the barrels called flor. So that allows biological aging, but stops a lot of oxygen getting in. And that is what, when you start to, you see this one is very, very light, very clear.
Light colour, yeah.
You go into that kind of more nuttiness and those kind of browny, more amber coloured cherries, but still dry. Then we go up to, there's a couple of other levels. There's some small bits of beer like Palo Cortado and things like that. You don't see huge amounts of them, but, there's other styles in there. But, we're talking about the main styles of sherry. We then go up to a cream sherry, which I think is the one style that most people may well have heard of, may well have tried. And this is a blend of Palomino sherry and PX sherry. So you've got two grapes. You've got Palomino, which makes your dry styles, and then you've got Pedro Jimenez, which makes your very, very sweet style. And they'll blend these together. And I think Harvey's Bristol Cream in the blue bottle is probably the epitome of what people expect that to be.
I think a lot of these ones were created deliberately for the British palate, for the British taste, because we were guiding these, and we did the same thing in port as well. And we said, actually, could it keep a bit of that lovely, delicious sweetness in it, and then it'll go brilliantly with some of the things.
And that's the thing. I don't want to jump too far ahead, but when you talk about the ports, it was the Portuguese houses were making the Tawny style ports, and the English houses were making the ruby styles generally back in the day, but people make a little bit more. And then you've got PX, which is a very, very sweet style. And you ever get your chance to get your hands onto PX, it's one of those that, should I be drinking this or pouring it on my pancakes? It's absolutely decadent. But that just showcases you can't really go, I don't really like sherry, because there's a style for everybody up and down the board. So this is the Sandemans. They've been making sherry. They're founded 1790. They've been doing it for a while, and started by a Scottish guy. But before we go into the tasting notes, all that kind of deep and meaningful, we should just go to the video. Have a little look at what we're going to be tasting tonight, different methods of fortified, so I don't go over it now and then you have to listen to him talk about it as well during a video. And we'll be back and talk about the tasting notes.
See you in a bit.
Back in the 1600s, Europeans were sailing all around the world. Now, let's gloss over that one, but what self-respecting colony could function without wine? The problem was that a grueling journey across the Atlantic would take up to a month, if you even survived at all. And of course the wine would often arrive in a very different condition to that in which it left, which is a polite way of saying it wasn't very good. Fortification is the story of the battle to make wine stable enough to travel all around the world through heat, storms, salty water, and in constant motion, all while in leaky barrels in the bottom of a sailing boat. While the group of fortified wines uses a whole range of different techniques, the key part, as the name suggests, is a fortification process, adding a spirit to the wine to increase its alcohol level. Brandy, unlike wine, seemed to survive the journeys in perfect condition, so merging the two was an obvious thing to try. The technique of fortification has been traced as far back as the 13th century, but it was later off in Portugal where it became popular. But how does it work? Well, alcohol is the enemy of bugs, microbes, which is why we've been rubbing it on our hands for the last 2 years. The magic number is around the 16% alcohol mark. Above this point, yeast really struggle to work, so do bacteria. So if we can move the alcohol percentage up by pouring in some brandy, for example, we can preserve that wine. Now, if you do that before the wine has finished fermenting, you keep some of the natural grape sugar that was about to turn into alcohol. And while that sugar does still really want to turn into alcohol, the yeast can no longer do anything with it. So fortification can be a great way of making a slightly sweeter wine. But that's not to say that all fortified wines are sweet. So let's talk about the main types of fortified wine: port, sherry, Madeira, vermouth, and the Aussie stickies, which you might not have heard of. Port is a great place to start. It's a blend of grapes from around the Douro Valley, such as Touriga Nacional. They're stomped by foot, fermented, and then the fermentation is stopped by adding brandy to keep some of the sweetness. It is then aged until a blend is created in a variety of different styles. Ruby is a lighter, easy drinking wine that's bottled fairly young. Tawny is an older, brown-coloured caramel style of wine that's usually had a bit more age and contact with oxygen. White port is almost always drunk young and goes very nicely with tonic, and there's even rosé available. Sherry comes from Jerez or Xerez in Spain, and while it might seem like a bit of a dinosaur, the blue bottles that we all know are not at all representative of the full range of very cool wines. Usually made from Palomino grapes, sherry uses different, unusual techniques to make a whole variety of styles. First, there's the choice over the sweetness. This is enabled by fortification, but done in a very different way to port. Rather than stopping the fermentation, you let it go dry and then you back sweeten with a different kind of sweet sherry. Sherries made from Palomino grapes are usually completely dry. Then there are also Pedro Jimenez or Jimenez sherries, which are incredibly sweet. Blending the two together was at the heart of made them so popular in England, so you can end up with a range from absolutely bone dry to sweetened Coca-Cola. The second technique is biological aging, underneath a film of yeast which grows on the surface of the wine, giving it amazing nutty-like flavours. This also can help shield the wine from oxygen, keeping it slightly fresher. Alternatively, it could be made with a lot of contact with air, making it darker coloured and flavoured. Now, some sherries come from inland areas with more mineral soils, whereas some, such as Manzanilla, come from salty parts where the sea is spraying the ground and adding its own flavour. Now finally, most sherries use a complicated aging system called a solera, which is a stack of barrels, where wines from different ages are progressively blended together over time, a little bit of the newer wine pouring into older and older and older barrels, giving a mixture of young and old flavours, which makes a much more complex wine. Madeira comes from the island of the same name. Yes, there's a trend here, and it's made in a similar way to the others, but with a few differences. Firstly, the grapes are very different, with unique varieties that only exist on the island. And secondly, perhaps more importantly, heat is brought into the mix, preempting the bad conditions many of the sailing boats would experience while going through hotter regions. Madeiran wines, therefore, are often exposed deliberately to the heat, getting any of that damage out the way so the winemaker can repair it and get the final say on what that end wine tastes like to ensure it's delicious. Vermouth is a wine, but it's also not a wine. It starts off dry and then it's flavoured with botanicals, just like gin, so we're talking about roots, flowers, spices, herbs, bark, and then it's fortified with spirits. The final drink can then also have additional sugar, often in the form of unfermented grape concentrate added, to create a sweeter style, and the high level of alcohol helps preserve that. There are now a huge range of different styles: white, red, amber, rosé, as well as everything from extra dry to extra sweet. Vermouth is often tipped as the next hot drink, so do keep an eye out. Australian stickies are one of Australia's iconic contributions to the world of wine. While often seen as alternatives to dessert wines like Sauternes or Topaque, they borrow techniques from all over the world of fortified wines, but combine them to make their own unique drink. It can be very easy to try to group fortified wines all together into one category, but here there's arguably as much variety in terms of styles and winemaking techniques as there is anywhere else in the whole world of wine. So explore it, and while we can all enjoy them at Christmas, we just think this category deserves a little bit more love all year round.
And welcome back. Yes, so this is a sherry, which is a fortified wine. It's a style of fortified wine normally, but in most things in wine, there is an exception to the rule. Like Burgundy is made of Chardonnay, isn't it?
You are obsessed with telling people this is not fortified on a fortified taste.
I am.
This is your point of reference.
But we like to do these slight tangents because you would assume it is fortified. And no, it turns out sherry does not need to be fortified. So this is a regularly made wine in pretty much every way. But it's just made from the classic Palomino grapes, and it goes up naturally to it's around 15%. It's got still really great acidity. It's a young, fresh, vibrant wine.
Yeah, so young for sherry. So this still spends 5 years going through what's called a solera system, which is where they make a barrel of sherry and they'll pull about 2/3, 3/4 of it off and bottle that.
Yeah.
They'll then top that up with the next year's sherry, and then the next year's sherry, and the next year's sherry.
And it just keeps on going
So
down.
it just kind of keeps going through this solera system, which creates a little bit of a house style, but B, it creates this fantastic history. And I think that's really kind of cool, you know, that you go 1 year with, I say, normal winemaking. You go 1 year, you make wine and go, hey, that was fantastic. That's a great wine. Let's sell loads of it and charge loads of money for it. And then the next year you go, ooh, that vintage didn't work very well. Can't do anything. With sherry, yes, you get good years, bad years, but they generally go through and they're making this, you know, really this history. And you go, you know, you talk about some of the, you know, you've got Soleras, 120, 150-year-old Soleras that you taste some of the sherry, and you know, it's an absolutely minute amount left. You know, it's like drops. But you go, this process to make this particular bottle of wine started decades ago, if not longer. And I think that's really, really cool that, you know, as you know, different generations and different winemakers, it's not almost, you can't almost go, oh, we're making a new style. If you've got a winery and someone likes to make a big opulent style of wine because that's the winemaker's choice, they make that and you go, oh, I remember this winery, they used to do this. And then they get a new winemaker in and they want a more kind of like austere, elegant style. You go, well, that doesn't taste like that winery anymore. This, you have this consistency of style and the consistency of tradition and history and and I think that's what's really, really cool about fortified wines.
Yeah.
So what do you think?
I think it's really cool. I think for me, you've got this really strong sort of mineral note that's coming through that I don't normally get in a lot of sherries. And I think, it's not quite into that saline thing that you get if you're in the bits that are closer to the sea, like your Manzanilla. And but it's got that real kind of character that you'd almost associate with some kind of the chalk soil based burgundies that you get, and it's a really cool wine. It's quite strong alcohol for a naturally fermented wine, and at 15%. I mean, most whites we don't normally see pushing up to that level, so it feels perhaps a bit hot. It feels like it's fortified. Your glass is steaming up because it's been so cold in the warehouse. Well, I think this is a great food for some sort of tapas-y kind of treats, and I think it would stand up to a lot of the seafoody style ones.
Well, I think it's you talk about those tapas-y kind of things, and it's got those notes in there. You've got that little bit of yeastiness that reminds you of some bread. It's got this almost like olive flavour. It's got these green herbaceous things. So you go when you're sat in the south of Spain where you are, and you sit in a little tapas bar, that's what you're having. You're having the breads and the olives and those kind of things, and it's got those flavours in there. Is this a bit bold to drink just by itself at 15%?
Perhaps,
maybe.
But I mean, I don't think it's not offensive. I mean, you only have a small amount.
Exactly, but it's ideal to go with food, is what I'm saying.
Really
this isn't, I'm not going to sit and just drink 2 glasses of this. It's go from there. But also, this does very well in cocktails, make a sherry cobbler, you do something like that, sherry with a little bit of spritz in, a little bit carver in there, make yourself a champagne cocktail-esque kind of thing, gives you a lot of opportunity. So very, very versatile. The one thing with the dry sherry that I would say, and we'll talk more about it as we go on, people think that a fortified wine lasts forever.
Yes.
And that is not true. You need to treat this like a white wine. You need to open it and drink it. Stick it in the fridge, 4 or 5 days maybe. Yeah. But this is why this is great. A lot of the sherries, this one especially, it comes in a 500ml bottle. A lot of them will come in 375s and 500s rather than having to go through a 750ml bottle. There are certain fortifieds that last forever.
Yeah.
There absolutely are. But this isn't one of them. So
if you were puzzled as to why there's a sticker on the front of your bottle saying, keep in the fridge and use with it, it's not for most of them. A lot of these wines are incredibly stable. They would survive these long trips across the sea, hideous conditions. But something that's 15% has been open like this, it's bone dry, so it's pretty stable. But it is closer to a regular wine in terms of its preservation than it is to those 20% plus fortified wines.
Absolutely.
But very cool wine. And it's nice to try something which is the exception to the rule rather than just another sort of Bristol cream or even having something like the Pedro Jimenez or Jimenez or whichever pronunciation you're trying to go with. And have something that it's nothing like a kind of just a typical white wine because of the Solera.
But I also think we associate fortifieds with being sweeter, stickier, over the top, and to have something that's bone dry is quite cool and quite different.
Delicious, I love it. And I think that olive note, the sort of green olive note, really comes through. I want some jamon with that. That would be great.
Fantastic. So, should we move on to something a little sweeter, a little stickier, a little different?
Fair. That sounds fair. Moving on to wine number 2. So, Jamie is beautifully opening this one up.
Beautifully.
Oh, well, I'm going to say
that.
I've
put myself under a lot of pressure to get this right now, haven't I?
Now, the lovely thing, for those of you who are joining us for the first time, we quite like to go off and have occasional interviews with the people who actually make the wines, or rather than us people telling you all about it, hear it from the horse's mouth. And so that's what we thought we would do with this one. But go on, tell me a little bit about this one, just as an introduction to who we're going to be talking to.
So this is just such a unique style. It's not made anywhere else in the world than in this way. So this is Campbell's of Rutherglen, and this is Australia. So Rutherglen, we're in Victoria, so we're near Melbourne, kind of like the northeast corner of Victoria is where we're at. And this is a fortified Australian wine. So they do a few styles. They make one with muscat. This is made with muscadel, and this is called their Topaque. Used to be called Topaque, but rules
they have a change.
And they had a conversation with the Hungarians. A discussion, I think, was the word Jane Campbell used, and decided that they would call it Topaque to keep a differentiation. But no, I was very, very lucky. I got to have a chat with Jane Campbell. It's her and her sister own the winery over there. She's the marketing, her sister's the winemaker, and you know, it's generations and generations have been putting these wines together. But rather than me yabber on about it too much, we can go to the interview and see what Jane has to say about this wonderful style of wine. So cheers.
Cheers, see you in a bit.
Hi, Jamie.
Hi, Jane. How are you?
Good, thank you.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you very much for taking a little bit of time to have a chat with me today.
Well, thanks, Jamie. The Campbell's story began back in 1870 when John Campbell sailed over on the ship Merchant Prince from St Andrews in Scotland, and he came to Rutherglen in search of gold, along with many other mad Scotsmen, I'm sure. And he was working on the Bobby Burns gold mine, and it flooded with water. So there was no other choice but to abandon the mine. And John Campbell decided to buy the land just opposite the gold mine and plant vines for some unknown reason. And he planted Riesling and Malbec, and made a start, and as some other Scotsmen did as well in the area. So Rutherglen's a very old and a very old established area, I should say, with many family wineries still here. And John Campbell was part of that. And then fortified production began as well with Muscat and Topaque, more heavily with the Rutherglen Muscat. And we're still making both styles today. And we're now into our 5th generation with my sister Jules, who's the winemaker, and myself as managing director. So we both, we're 50-50 owners, and it's going well so far. And we've got the 6th generation on the ground as well. So yeah, there's never a dull moment.
Oh, that's absolutely fantastic. So just for people who might not know Australia and exactly the region, whereabouts is Rutherglen? Where are we looking in Australia?
Rutherglen is in Victoria, and it's in northeast Victoria. So it's sort of, as you're looking at a map of Australia, it's and then Victoria, it's the top right-hand corner. We're about 2 hours from the Alps, so it's great for skiing. And it's very close to the Murray River, which is the main border river between New South Wales and Victoria, if people are familiar with that area, which is in high flood at the moment. So that's where we are. We're perched up there, and we've got a beautiful climate here. And one of our main reasons why fortifieds are so successful in this area is because of our long autumns. We have these usually dry, warm autumns without any rain, and our fortifieds, our Muscat and Topaque, can sit on the vine up until, you know, late March, early April, and they're the last to pick, and they stay on the vine until they're not quite raisiny, but almost, and full of sugar, and that's when we pick them. And they're basically full of sunshine, we like to say, and you can taste that. Particularly on a cold UK winter's evening, you can certainly taste that Australian sunshine in every glass. When we pick the grapes, they're almost like little raisins, but still with some juice in them, obviously. And then we fortify them with pure grape spirit. So grape spirit doesn't have any character at all. It's totally inert, for want of a better word. And then we leave them until they come out at around 17% alcohol, 17 to 17.5% alcohol. And basically the Campbell's style is also quite special because we use a Solera here, which is similar to the sherry system, and it allows us to have this beautiful consistency. So every year we top our fortified Soleras up with new materials, so we have this lovely freshness of each new vintage, but we're quietly layering as well. So our Rutherglen, which is the baby classification, we call it, the youngest classification, that has 3 to 5 years of muscat history in it. And something like our Merchant Prince, which is our top muscat, that has up to 80 and over years of family history, really, in every glass. And these, I should also say, these are lovely room temperature. And that, the characters really come out there on the nose. You can smell the tea leaves and all sorts of things. And then in summer, we like to serve them chilled. So we keep them in the fridge, and that's just another way that you can enjoy them as well, or just drop an ice cube in them too. So, yeah.
And that's interesting to, have those options. And I'm a big believer, drink wine as you like it. If you like it a little cooler, a little warmer, that's absolutely fine. But to have that kind of such extremes that, in the winter, in front of a fire, sit with that room temperature, lovely, and you can almost feel like you're going skiing with that. But I then can also see the other side that, you have that chilled in the summer, out in the sunshine, go down to the beach. It's, it's bright, it's fresh, it's got that lovely acidity. It's such a versatile wine.
It has, and it has still got that acidity, and that's something that we pride ourselves on here with our fortified style, so that they have that lovely clean finish. They're not heavy and cloying on the palate, which can really bring about palate fatigue after a while. So we like to keep them clean and fresh. But you can probably still taste it now on your palate, and it's just that lovely layering's coming through. And yeah, this is the youngest one. This is 3 to 5 years old. So we've got, there's 3 other classifications that sit on top of this. So but there's a lot of work in fortifieds. It's not like table wine. I mean, there's work in table wines as well, but usually in table wine, you either make it and sell it in that same year, or you make it and then sell it in 3 or 4 years' time. With fortifieds, as you can see, this is just a small example, but I'm totally surrounded by them here, and they are years in the making. So an accountant has lots of fun with trying to, value just the stocks that we have on hand here. But it's a great smell in the summer. If you ever get over in the summer, under the corrugated roof, it's an intoxicating smell of these muscats and fortifieds. So it's a good place to be.
I can imagine.
Sure.
Am I right in saying all the work is done with the Soleras, and once it's bottled, it's not really designed to develop any further in the bottle, is it? It's you go through the Solera,
that's right.
And once it goes in the bottle, that's how it is. It's not something that you then hold on to for 5-10 years, lay it down. When it's ready to go, it's ready to drink. Yes.
Yeah, 100%. And because they're aged in oak, even though it's very old oak casks, because we don't want any oak characteristics with interfering with the Topaque and muscat flavors. So our oak casks, we buy French oak every year, and the first 2 years tends to have a white wine in there, and then the next 3 years a red, then the next 2 years it's a port, and then finally it goes to a Topaque or muscat cask. And as you know, the casks are porous, so they oxidize as they age. And I think 2 or 3% every year is lost to the angels, as we call it, the angel share. So when they're bottled at their peak. And so when people open them, they're all under screw cap now. You can open them and put the screw cap back on, and they'll last 3 to 4 months with no problem at all.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah, so they're often forgotten about, but they're very versatile wines, and they're just delicious, and they leave a huge impression on the palate.
They do, and the joys of doing tastings like these is it puts these wines in front of people that they probably wouldn't walk through their independent wine shop or just grab a bottle off a restaurant wine list because what is it? So having the opportunity to try and taste is absolutely fantastic, and it amazes me like the length of time. You're almost 10 years before a barrel even goes near the muscat with the white wine, the red wine, the port. So the level of prep and dedication, and as you said, it's not like a table wine where you go, well, I've made some this year and it was great, so I sold it. Had a bad year this year, so don't worry too much about it. We'll do something else next year. You've really got, 80 years of barrels and history to go. This is, it's a little bit in the making. It's not, we'll start making some Topaque tomorrow and we'll be ready to go next week. It's really not that. It's
not
amazing.
at all. No. Yeah, and I think there's winemakers and then there's fortified winemakers, and they're quite a different beast. They've got huge amounts of concentration, and you have to be really seriously passionate about fortifieds to do it. And it's a huge legacy that Jules and I have now to keep it up and keep them all up to spec as well. But we've got a great team here at the winery, and yeah, everyone's very much invested. So it's looking pretty good for the future.
That's nice. It must be, compared to, a lot of, regular winemaking, a year-round gig, rather than we've done harvest, we've pressed it, we've bottled it, see you later, and we'll hang out for a bit until we get next year's vintage. It must be constantly, daily checking barrels and topping up and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, it definitely is. And the other thing with fortifieds is that it's they're topped up and checked very, very often. And also once we've finished harvest, the cellar cats just decided to join me. Once we've finished harvest, then that's when the fortified work begins as well. So and just the meticulous records that are kept to show different blends. And and also you also need to be able to tell in a vintage, say with vintage coming up this next year, potentially there might be a really good muscat there that we think will eventually make our merchant prints. So you're actually trying to think 60, 70 years ahead. So it's exhausting.
Wow. So do you bring everything in, vinify everything separately, and then go, well, that's going to go into that? So do you have multiple Soleras running depending on the styles?
Yeah, we have up to 5-stage Soleras.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it's a work that my father, Colin Campbell, was absolutely passionate about, and just to have that palate that can say, this wine's going to make it, or no, this wine's going to have a shorter life, therefore it goes into a Rutherglen or a classic, Yeah. Just the amount of planning is it's amazing. So we're very grateful. We've just got to try and keep it up now, which we're doing so far.
So how is, because we find in the UK a lot kind of the sweeter wines, the fortified, the dessert wines, kind of, they really only seem to come out around Christmas time. People go, oh, it's Christmas, we should have that, and it screams out. How is the market for this style of wine in Australia? And are you seeing any changes? Is people, as wines become a little bit more global, people are more into having these wines year round, or what are you seeing as far as the market for them?
This is Emily, our cellar cat, so she's just saying hello to everyone. The demand is certainly not enormous, and what we like to say is that our fortifieds are a draw card for people to come to Rutherglen. It's often why they've heard of Rutherglen, and then often when they get here, they might buy one bottle of muscat or Topaque and then buy our table wines, which is also great. But what we've tried to do for years is to bring these fortifieds away from that, end of after dinner drink only, or Christmas time, festive time, and bring them into summer so that people can enjoy them, with an ice cube or in a cocktail. Thanks, Jamie, very much.
Cheers. Bye.
See you.
Welcome back. It was a really interesting interview. It's always great to hear from these pioneers of the wine world.
Oh, and it's always insightful. The big problem is I get talking to these people. I'm like, I need to go. I've got Alex. I'll see you in a month. I'm just off to Rutherglen.
Yeah, indeed. So Rutherglen is a town that's on the Murray River, and this just sort of north of Melbourne. When I was over there, I kind of tiptoed just around to the west of this, and I missed out. So next time I will be back. But a very, very interesting and distinctive wine. I love the fact that we've just done wine 1, which was made in the Solera system, and now we've moved on to wine 2 that took inspiration from the sherry techniques and methods that they were using, and thought, well, why can't we create our own thing from doing this?
Yeah, these got, they've got a Solera that's 80 years old in at Campbell's, and absolutely pioneers of this style. And these it is its own kind of style, and you'll hear them called Rutherglen Stickies. So there's Sauternes, there's sherries, there's ports, and Rutherglen Stickies is its own kind of thing.
Yeah.
And so all in that area, lots and lots of producers making a similar style of wine. So it's not just Campbell's doing it. There's Morris. There's lots of cool people making this style of wine in that area.
Do you know, it's warm. It's quite funny because obviously the further north you go into Australia, generally speaking, the warmer it gets, and it gets quite sort of outbacky incredibly quickly as you go sort of north of Melbourne. And as you head up to this point, it's really only this river that's kind of providing this sort of a oasis-like condition where you can be growing all of the things. But the climate is hot, and it gets these grapes so ripe, and that's what gives these incredibly sort of complex fruit flavours, plus of course that sweetness.
Yeah, as we mentioned, it's almost done as a late harvest style that's then fortified and then chucked in the Solera. So there's a lot of process that goes on, a lot of things that happen, and it all happens for a reason. I think that's really important, that there's a lot of winemaking out there and people go, why'd you do that? Well, we felt like it, and we thought that would be
we had
cool.
to mask something that was wrong.
Or we had a batch to do that. But these have to be, everything has to be carefully considered, especially when using a Solera system. You can't go, just chuck that in.
No.
You've got to, carefully consider every move and everything you do, and
because it has effects for years or decades to come afterwards.
And
so,
I say it's slightly lower alcohol for a fortified. You're just sitting at, they're generally between 17 and 17.5%, so they're a little bit lighter. And I just think, you're over 250 grams per litre sugar in this.
Wow.
But yes, it's sticky, hence why it's called a Rutherglen sticky. But it has this nice freshness at the end. It's not overly, it sticks to your glass, absolutely. But when you have it on the palate, it's got this nice fresh finish to it.
Well, since we're on the Adventurers series, perhaps we should talk just a little bit about, obviously we talk about things that balance each other. And when it comes to
My
sweetness...
height, your height.
It's a kind of balancing out today.
Nice booster seat.
It's just a simple height adjustment tweak, not not a booster seat. Wanted to be able to see the penguin. That's the most important thing. Moving on swiftly, balancing sweetness in wine. Generally,
acidity,
acidity.
And I think that's the thing. The high sweetness isn't necessarily bad.
No.
Unless you have no acidity, and then it's just there. So you can have low sweetness with low acidity, balanced, medium, balanced, high, balanced.
Yeah.
So more doesn't necessarily mean it's better or worse or indifferent.
No.
And it's the other things that come around with it. If you have very high tannin, if you want to be balanced, you want to have very high fruit. Yeah. If you have very high alcohol, you want to be very high in flavors to kind of balance those things, but also very low, because you have very low tannin, you don't want very high fruit.
No.
And if you've got very low alcohol, you don't want very high, it's about all these different things. And it's not, just to be very clear, it's not one thing plus one thing equals one thing. There's hundreds and hundreds of different little bits and pieces within wine that helps this balance. So I've kind of probably very overly simplified it. But it's that idea that each winemaking decision and each bit that goes into the wine is what comes up with that final thing. And it's what the winemaker is looking for as to how they're going to do these things.
What's quite interesting and tough to get that balance, particularly with something like this, is that you're fighting against the natural tendencies of the plant itself. So why does a grape have acidity in it? It's basically to stop animals from eating it before the seed is ripe enough to go off and form a new plant. So it has that acidity, the sourness to distract the animals. As the sugar grows up, there's your carrot for the birds to go off and come along and eat it.
I thought it was a grape, not a carrot.
A grape, not a carrot. Yeah, a metaphoric carrot.
I never thought we'd be talking about metaphorical carrots.
No, but so you've got this sweetness which is designed to kind of attract the animals. Yes, they're going to go and get their energy. They've got everyone loves to go and get that sweetness. The acidity tends to drop down as you've got the ripeness increasing. So with something that's harvested late like this, generally speaking, the acidity would really drop away quite significantly. So, but what they've got here is they've got a total acidity. Now, right, we're probably used to, if you remember your GCSE chemistry, you measure acidity in pH, and if it's low, then it's very acidic. If it's 7, it's neutral. If it's 14, it's very alkaline. Don't do that in winemaking. We use the total or titratable acidity, and that is basically what your tongue is doing. It's trying to neutralize the acid in the wine by producing lots of sort of that, your mouth just waters to try to balance that. And it's that mouth-watering nature that cuts through that sticky sugar and makes it all work. And I think if you were having a dessert that's got, quite a bit of sugar, like a sticky toffee pudding or something, again, you also need just that little bit of acidity to cut through. So this would be a great pairing, I think, with something that is a sort of a dessert that just needs you to cut through a bit. But I mean, what would you be going for pairing with this?
So, sticky toffee pudding is A class with this. Also, anything with a little bit of citrus in there, because it's got this almost like orange blossom thing going on. So, this, you want to be very simple with this, with a Terry's chocolate orange at Christmas, ready to go. Knock, knock, drink.
Well, that's breakfast sorted. Excellent.
So yeah, anything like that chocolate with mandarin or something like that, Terry's chocolate orange, I think would be really nice.
Yeah.
Anything with kind of dried fruit, like dried figs, something like that would be great. This with a cheese board, like a mature cheddar with that little bit of salinity.
It's almost like having a kind of fig chutney with it, isn't it?
Yeah, and any kind of like dried fruits, like apricots, dried peaches, that kind of stuff would be really good with that. That's got that, I know they're your two favourite things. But I think it's quite versatile. And with this, you can either drink it room temperature and go, this is very Christmassy and very, it's almost that mulled wine spices kind of thing going on in it. Obviously not red wine, but that kind of clovey, orange, brandy-esque kind of thing that you find, that you add to your red wine to make it a mulled wine in there.
Yeah.
But you can also, I would quite happily, in the middle of summer, sit and have this slightly chilled, just sat outside having a little sip of it. I think it's nice. It's, it's got enough.
It's funny because I was about to slightly sort of question that, but because I don't know if I would have done that. But what I've done that's slightly
you're not coming around to mine in the summer then, at the end.
But I have had like Vinsanto in Tuscany late at night on a warm summer's day, and a very chilled Vinsanto, and that actually was marvellous. So yet again, I should probably just trust the certified sommelier in terms of wine recommendations, because that could work.
But it's each their own. If you have it slightly chilled and go, no, that's not for me, don't worry about it. Drink it as you like. And that's the big thing with wine. There's so many ways to explore and try and to have something new. You go, that was really good. And, Jamie said that should go with this. And I thought that was an awful pairing. Never do it again. But that's the joy of wine. Everyone's going to have a difference of opinion. Everyone's going to like something more than something else. And... if everyone had the same opinion, we'd have one red, one white, with one food pairing, and it would be quite boring. The joy of wine and food is there's always a new level of experimentation, which is great.
I like that. It's different. It's cool. It's not like anything else, like you say.
Bit like me then.
But yeah, I mean, Australia. What iconic styles have they got that are theirs? They're great at making good Chardonnay, good Shiraz, good Cabernet Sauvignon.
It is, but you've got to look at Australian history that they started doing this because the wines needed to get out of the country. And because they were so far away from anything, without doing some level of fortified, nothing was going to be good at the back end. We've seen great fortified since, the 1860s out of Australia. And when we talk about Australia as a global wine producing country, we've really kind of, for still wines, we talk about late 70s, early 80s onwards is kind of where it really started to pick up. So this style's got a 100-year head start on what we see as, great quality, the great quality Australian Shirazes or Chardonnays or Cabernet Sauvignons from particular regions. This guy's got a 100-year head start on that, and that's really interesting.
I like that. I like a wine with a bit of history that I didn't know much about. So thank you for introducing us to that. I think we should move on now to the next wine.
That will be Tres.
Wine number 3, indeed. So, in fact, I'm just going to go and clear this glass out, and we'll see you back in a moment.
Fantastic. Wine number 3. Depending when you're watching this, Argentina may or may not still be in the World Cup, and Lionel Messi may or may not be a very happy boy.
Argentina and Malbec are completely synonymous these days, which in a way is a marvellous achievement. It's great that what they've done with this grape that, originated in France and was more famous with the sort of Cahors region of France, but, it's now Argentina's national grape, and they've done so many cool things with it. But the reason it's a bit of a shame is because Argentina makes so much more than just Malbec, and you need to go and check some of them out. But this is not your average Malbec.
It is not. It is not at all. So yeah, I think what Alex said is exactly what Argentina have done. They've taken something, they've made it their own, and it's vastly different to any style in the world. But
You don't get this in France.
Not at all.
No.
But I think that's what's important. Sometimes you'll tar a grape with the same brush or a region with the same brush and go, oh, I only like French wines, or I don't like Chardonnay, or whatever it is. There's so many different styles that you can find of the same grape around the world, and even within the same country. A Sauvignon Blanc, in France is very different if it's in the Loire Valley, even across the river from Sancerre to Pouilly-Fumé, let alone down, into Bordeaux. Very, very different.
Yep.
But what they've done here is they have made a sweet Malbec and then fortified it to make a dessert wine style. And I've never had one of these before. This is the first, and I've not seen too many people making these.
No.
And I think it's a really, really cool style. Domaine Bousquet, they've also got holdings in France. So they started in France, they came over to Argentina, and he started by growing a lot of French varietals. There was Pinot Noir and bits and pieces like that. And
they still use that for their rather beautiful sparkling wine, don't they,
absolutely. But the story behind it is he started growing Malbec to try and fit in. Because everyone else growing it. So he calls his Pinot Noir Rosé the chameleon, because he had to be a bit like a chameleon to blend in, to be able to make these other things. So started growing Malbec, made some really good Malbec, and still, now makes lots of different styles. He makes Chardonnay, he makes these great Pinot Noirs, he makes sparklings, and has this fantastic Malbec Dulce, which is that sweet style, 2018 vintage. So, a couple of years on it. And it's interesting because there's not a lot of fortified wines, apart from ports and sherries, that you really see vintages on. A lot of them are either age marked, like 10 year, 20 year, 30 year.
Which is not, this was made 10 years ago. That's a kind of an average age, isn't it, often?
So it's so it's either average age or it's kind of, in a port, it's like this has been hanging out in a barrel for 10 years, and then it was 10 years before it went into the into the thing. So making this great style, it's got beautiful acidity, lovely fruit. It tastes like Malbec.
It does, yeah. It's got that hit of blue fruit that makes it so different from what we've just done on previous wines. It's definitely still a Malbec, and it's got that kind of nose of that rich Malbec. But when you get it into your mouth, it's just so much more indulgent and chocolatey and delicious. And Malbec, Argentinian Malbec that's been in oak can be pretty chocolatey anyway, but this takes it to a whole different level.
But this is, as far as pairing wise, this is your chocolate cake, your Black Forest Gatto, those kind of deep, darker, jammier kind of thing, blackberry pie, that kind of stuff. This is less so your cheese board, your nutty desserts, your panna cottas, those kind of things. And we said with a couple of the other ones that you can just sit and drink it by itself. For me, this is definitely a food wine. You want to have something to eat with it. So if we're doing Christmas, this is your Yule log pairing, isn't it?
I think so, for sure. And I think you could pair it with some sort of after-dinner chocolates as well, potentially as well. But it depends on how indulgent you're being throughout the day. In fact, actually, if my kids are involved, it'll be their breakfast chocolates.
Yeah, after you've had your Christmas dinner, your mince pies, your Christmas pudding with your Rutherglen Muscat. You've had your Yule log, and now you're onto your after-dinner chocolates, Mr. Taylor.
Is anyone able to walk after 3 p.m. in your house?
I try not to be able to.
That's a wise thing to try for. That's a cool wine. It's not your typical wine. It's the acidity still makes it really nice and mouth-watering. So if you've got something that's been made with loads of butter and sugar, it cuts through. I like it.
I think it's lovely. It's lovely.
Fantastic. Well, I think we should move on at that stage to wine number 4, and we'll see you in a second.
Okay, so moving on to wine number 4, and my thought is, if you've got 2 glasses, let's get 4 and 5 in the glass together, because we've got 2 different ports. So, wine number 4 is a 10-year-old Tawny, and wine number 5 is an LBV port. So port comes in many styles, many things going on with it. And this is another one where you can't make a blanket statement. So your two main styles are really Tawny and Ruby. So Ruby ports are designed to be a little bit lighter, a little bit fresher, a little bit younger, a little bit more kind of like that jammy, deep fruit,
fruitier,
easy drinking. And then your Tawny port is the one that has that kind of, that deeper flavors, that nuttiness. And because there's two different ways that we're making them. So your Tawny port is made in an oxidative style. You want to get some oxygen in there, and this is where you get this kind of nuttiness, this earthiness. And then with a Ruby port, we're trying to stay away from oxygen to kind of keep it nice and fresh. And this is why I like to pour these two side by side, because if you just look at the colour difference, that may well be where they get their names from. And these days you're seeing most port houses are making multiple styles of ports. But it used to be that the Portuguese style was to make this Tawny style port, and the British owned port houses were making this ruby style, this much more kind of, fresh, quaffable style. I think Tawny is sometimes a little bit more of a serious wine, more depth, more, flavours, more kind of, that primary, secondary, tertiary kind of characteristics we talk about. And then the Ruby port is deeper, darker, maybe a bit more decadent, but just, a lot more kind of that rich fruitiness about it. So wine number 4, this is from Barros, and this is a 10-year-old Tawny. So Barros, they've been around over 100 years now, so they've been doing their stuff for a fair while. This is, to be a port, the grapes come from the Douro Valley, and, most of the ports are made in Oporto. And what we have with this is we've got a 10-year stamp. So this means that the wine is aged in barrel for 10 years before it's bottled. Okay, so you'll see these stamp marks. You'll see 10-year, 20-year, 30-year, 40-year, and that's to do with how long they sit in barrels before they're bottled. With a Tawny port, once it goes into the bottle, that's it. It's done. You don't need to age it any longer. You don't need to hang out. You don't have a 10-year port and you put it in for your cellar for 10 years. You then got a 20-year port.
And that's because it's developing in the presence of that oxygen. The oxygen's helping bring all the different components of the wine together and change their structure, and those processes can only happen with a little bit of oxygen. So you've got these massive long warehouses that are on the south bank of the River Douro in Porto, and they are just laid out with these pipes, as they're called, the big wooden barrels full of port, which, they're made of natural materials. They're made of wood. They do leak a bit. They still have to do a lot of management and topping up the barrels and checking they're not leaking everywhere. But it is a process which inherently lets that development happen. But when you stick it in your glass bottle and you put a good quality closure into it, that's done.
Absolutely. And what you'll see, and it's not the bottle that we've got here, but just while we've got it on the side, we've got a bottle of Tawny and a bottle of Ruby here. And your Tawny ports, you'll generally see with this kind of closure, which is that cap that pops in because that seals, no more oxygen happening, okay? And then when you have a Ruby or an LBV, you'll quite often see a natural cork, because when you open it and you pour it and you drink it, you want a little bit of oxygen, like you do with any other bottle of wine that you open,
a big red wine,
to kind of help that development in the glass. So you'll see these two different cork styles going into port. And obviously, port is, Portugal is the home of cork, so they're very proud and very precise about how they're doing their cork and going in. So what do we think about this?
It's it's like trying to compare, I don't know, let's say, for example, an old world Rhone Syrah with a new world Shiraz. They're just made to do different things, and they've got such totally different styles, and they'll work in different situations. So I don't think you can say one's better than the other. I think this would tick more boxes of complexity, and if you're putting them into a wine competition, possibly this one would win. But actually, they're just different styles, and it doesn't really matter which one you prefer. Just you're probably going to prefer one or the other quite strongly, I'd have thought.
So I agree with that, but also, as always, I disagree with that. A lot of it comes down to what are you doing? Yeah, what are you doing with it? If you are having, a meal, sitting down, end of the meal, you want, you've got a big cheese board with lots of flavours, nuts, figs, 5 different cheeses, this might be the wine for it. Yeah. If it's been a cold day out and you just want to sit at the end of the night in front of a fire and have a glass of port, that's probably your glass. Yeah. So I think it's the same thing with so many wines. It's not always about one's better than the other. Yes, people might have a preference right now with 2 wines in front of them and go, at this occasion, I prefer this wine or this wine, and that's fine. But if we talk about when you would drink it, there's going to be the right occasion for each of these wines.
Yeah.
But as far as tasting and pairing, wine number 4, let's talk a little bit about what your flavours and thoughts and what you get out of this.
Well, it's very much going into those dried fruits, the sort of the preserved, not preserved fruits. Preserved fruits, I'd say that's more the jammy kind of style there. That's more into your sort of dried kind of, raisinated things and along those lines.
Yeah, I think you sit with these very much dried fruit versus stewed fruits.
Yeah.
Are your kind of your looks in there, and this has more of that kind of like nutty. There's a lot more kind of like nuttiness, textural fruits. This is much more dark forest fruits and kind of things like there's a lot of chocolate in there, a lot of richness in there.
A bit more of the sort of the vanilla still coming through as well. But they tend to use quite old oak barrels. These pipes have been there for forever, basically. Yeah. So you're not getting that hit of the fresh wood in a wine like this that you would have done in other oak age things.
And these pipes, they're 550 litres. They're a big, so that's 2 and a bit normal sized barrels. It's a lot of wine in there. And people still do, but people used to a lot. They, as a kid was born or something like that, they'd buy a pipe of port because it was something.
Keep you going over the odd Christmas or two.
But it was something that would live out an age, and when whatever the drinking age is in your country, whether it's 21 in the States or 18 or 14 in France, that pipe of port would last.
Yeah.
If you have a kid born this year and you buy them a case of Pinot Grigio, that's not going to be any good for drinking when they turn 18, is it? No. And the port is a great option for age and celebration, and it's one of the few wines when you get to my kind of age that you can buy a birth year wine
for sure.
that's still relatively decent value and still got a pretty good guarantee that it's going to be in good nick. We did some stuff, around my 40th this year, then had a couple of 82 wines, and some were great and some were
young gits
less than. But there we go. So that's our Tawny. Have you got any further thoughts on Tawny before we go a bit of a more deep dive into the LBV?
I think what you say about it being it's not a dessert wine for me. Obviously there is sweetness, so if you were to want to try it, you could. But I just think the fresher fruits of that one starting to go with sort of cakes and Yule logs and whatnot are on the ruby side. For this, I think this is more of a cheese port. Now, we often talk about port and Stilton, and apologies if you've seen us talking about port and Stilton before and how this kind of relationship came about, but it wasn't so much about this being the perfect flavour pairing. It was about trying to stop the Stilton going off on those long journeys. So they would take your big wheel of cheese, they'd hollow out the middle of it, and they'd fill it full of port, and the alcohol would help stop the flies laying their larvae in the cheese, so it wouldn't arrive a horrible rancid rotten mess. So it wasn't so much, but like so many things, it becomes about tradition, and at that point, we like having these things together. It's not necessarily the best combination.
It's a delicious combination.
It's a delicious combination. I think, when you're talking about blue cheeses, you often go for those really fruity sweet ones. Like, a classic would be the Canadian style of ice wines, a Cabernet Franc red ice wine from Canada. Brilliant combination with some blue cheese. Yeah, really, really, really lovely. Expensive combination, but
delicious nonetheless.
Delicious nonetheless, and I think the bit of the sweetness does help it, but certainly a bit more fruitiness can help with those blue tangy cheeses. So they've got a bit of acidity in them as well that's come out through that sort of souring process. I don't know. It's tricky. I can see that going quite nicely with some kind of stronger flavoured cheeses.
I think some like real top end mature cheddars that
Yeah.
have that like little crystalline.
I was
salt
going for sort
structure
of
running through
Comte.
it.
That would be my but yeah, on that kind of that slightly harder cheese with a bit of salt in it.
Yeah, a bit of oomph to it. Yeah,
a bit
absolutely.
of something
the
very
cheese that
nice.
lends itself to that kind of nuttiness, and like manchego with this, I think would be quite good. So lots of options. So whatever's on your Christmas cheese board, dive in.
Yeah.
Let us know.
You're not going to have a bad time, are you? If you've got port and you've got cheese, it's
You're
good
going to be
with the
all right.
world. Yeah.
Exactly. So let's talk a little bit about LBV. So this is LBV stands for late bottled vintage. So it's bottled after the harvest, later than anything else. Easy as that. It's in the name. So this is where we go for this richer, riper, and I think more people drink this style of port, and this is what people expect from a port. You know, the rubies, the LBVs, the vintages are all done in that ruby style, whereas the Tawnys are done like that age mark, the 10-year, 20-year, 30-year, 40-year kind of style, or, you know, there's some barrel selections and things like that. But this is from Quinta de Portal. I just think it's beautiful, it's rich, it's decadent. I could talk about it for 3.5 hours, but I got to speak to Pedro from Quinta de Portal. So we'll dive to him now. A little bit of a backstory about, you know, where port came from, the reason behind port, a bit of the heritage. So there's a little bit of a overview of port in there, a little bit more information for everyone. And then we have a little bit of a deep dive into this one. So we'll go to the video, we'll come back, we'll finalise our tasting notes, and we'll go from there. So we'll see you in just a couple of minutes.
Sounds good.
Pedro, thank you very much for taking the time to talk with us for the Online Wine Tasting Club today. So what we really want to focus on is, I think in the UK, it comes to around Christmas time and people bring a bottle of port out that's been hanging in their cupboard for the last 10 years. They have a little sip of it, it goes back in the cupboard, and it really comes out around the holiday times. And yes, we're doing it in the holiday times, but there's so much more to port than that. So what I'd love to start with is just a little bit of a history of, you know, port, why it's important, why it's special, and, you know, your history, your family.
Yes, okay, very well. So thank you, Jamie, for having me today. It's a pleasure to be here online with all of you and share a little bit of our experience, our knowledge about the Douro, about port, about who we are. So I will start with a little background of Quinta de Portal, of myself, and then we'll move to the port's history and information, which is can be quite big, large, and then we'll test the ports, if that's okay with you.
That sounds perfect.
So our house, our winery is Quinta do Portal. It's a winery that on its foundation as a port wine, as in its genes, in the genesis of Quinta do Portal is port wine. And a property that has been in the families for 5 generations now, since 1881, making port. The winery itself, it has evolved for not just the port, but also the Douro still wines. But today we'll focus on our main product, which really is port. So this all started. We are located in the Pinhão River Valley, so within the Douro, the demarcated region. The Douro region is considered the first wine region in the world to be demarcated. It was back in 1756. And so it was delimited and regulated in order to protect the quality of port wine. So it was not just, they created not just the boundaries, but also quite a lot of regulations. So we are in the Douro, so the Douro Valley, Douro region is it spreads along the Douro River, which comes from it has its spring in Spain, and in Portugal when it gets to the Douro wine region, it flows from east to west. So the mouth of the river is in the city of Porto, and the Douro wine region spreads along the Douro River basin. It's about 250,000 hectares, of which 44,000 hectares are covered with vineyards. And of those, we have about 25,000 hectares that are able to make port wine, that are allowed to produce port. So port comes only from the Douro region. That's the only place in Portugal where you can make port. It's a mountain wine region. It's made of very steep slopes. And it's actually the biggest mountain wine region in the world. It accounts for more than 50% of the total
Wow.
mountain wine regions all over the world. So we started by our most recent story. It last 140 years. Started. It was a great uncle of my grandfather that started really focusing on making port, on improving the quality of the port that it was made at this property. That it's called Quinta dos Muros. So it's located in the east slopes of the Pinhão River Valley. But it was always a small production. It was never the main business of the family. But this property somehow has always conquered the hearts of every generation that was able to work in it, and to keep it and make it better for the next generation. Actually, my grandparents, that they made a will while they were living, that this property could only be sold between brothers. So the son that will inherit it should only be able to sell it to one of the siblings. So
okay.
That's how important in terms of passion this property has always been for the family. So, and then until my grandfather passed away in 1973, and what they did until then was make the port and then sell it in bulk to the other shippers, so that there was never brands or anything. Since 1974, my father decided to start building his own stock of ports, and we're talking mainly of Tawny ports. Actually, until quite recently, the Portuguese port families will focus mainly on Tawny ports, and the British mainly on ruby ports. So my father decided to start building his own stock of port, expanding the vineyard area. He bought a second property in 1978. And then finally in 1991, we decided to start our own commercial projects. Back then we bought two more properties that back in the day they were owned by Seagram, that used to have a port wine house here in Portugal. It was Sandeman. And that was when we really started diversifying the styles of port. We start by making a wine like any other wine. So the grapes came into the winery. We put them in either in tanks or in open tanks that we call a lagar. We started with the fermentation process, and then depending on the wine that we want to make in the end, a drier wine or a sweeter wine, we'll add the spirit, and we use a spirit made of wine, which is 77% alcohol at 21 degrees of temperature. So it's quite a lot of alcohol, and we add about 20% of alcohol into the must. So with if you want to measure by the port pipe, or that we call pipa, which is a 550 liter barrel, we have 110 liters of spirit to 440 liters of wine.
Okay.
Tawny ports, we age them in wood, in casks, always with oxygen, so they are never topped up. There's always some quantity of oxygen inside.
Yeah.
So it's an oxidative process. Whereas for the ruby ports, we want to keep them as young as possible, so we treat them like a regular red wine.
So how does an LBV come about? Where do we start, and how do we get to a 2014 LBV?
Yeah, so first the LBV, the meaning of the style. LBV stands for late bottled vintage. So meaning that it's a wine that we bottle later than vintage port. Vintage port, you have a time frame between 2 and 3 years after the harvest to bottled wine. And the LBV, you have a time frame of 4 to 6 years after the harvest. So meaning the wine spends more time aging, either in cask or stainless steel, or how you want to age it, longer than vintage port. and that longer aging will make the wine smoother, more ready to drink when it's bottled. So the LBV, it's from a single vintage. Typically, it should be a very good wine. And the big advantage from LBV to vintage port is that it's ready to drink at an earlier stage, and it's much more economic than a bottle of vintage port.
Okay.
So it's LBV. It's a ruby from the big ruby family of ports. Like you can see, quite a ruby color here. And here, what we get is completely different from what we had in the Tawny in terms of aromas, and so we have quite a lot of chocolate, a lot of red fruit, but also black fruit like dark plum, dark cherry. But we also have some raspberry, strawberry, very nice chocolate notes.
It's just a very rich, decadent style of port. It's all that dark fruit, that chocolatiness. There's a lot of mocha in there running through. And yeah, it's an absolutely, different beast. If you just look at, if I can get that on the camera, that color side by side. That just
side by side to see the main reason why we call it Tawny Port 1 and the Ruby Port the other. So port is about color. So you have white port, Tawny, and Ruby. So you have 3 colors. That really are the 3 styles of port wine. Let's think about our 2014 late bottled vintage. Was just made to the list of the top 100 wines of the year Wine Enthusiast. That just came out last week. So the number 34 on the list.
Oh, fantastic! Congratulations.
Thank you. So even though traditionally, like I said, traditionally back in the day we just focus on Tawny ports. We've been doing quite well with our ruby style of ports also. And this is I think this is a great wine for every occasion. Also the LBV, it's quite, like I said, it's quite ready to drink. This one has been in bottle for 4 years now. Another thing, another reason why we use the driven corks, it's because we don't filter our LBV.
Okay.
So it will still age in bottle after being bottled. Perfect, Jamie. Thank you very much for having me.
Have a great day. We'll speak very soon. Cheers.
You too. Have a great day. Bye. Cheers. So this is a Tawny Port. You can see the color.
I think what's really interesting in this, and we'll look at the ruby, how light this is in color, but then how powerful it is on the nose. It's almost, if you're not a Tawny Port drinker, it's almost unexpected that you see that color and think, oh, that's going to be quite light, but it's so powerful.
Yeah. So it has a quite beautiful tonic color, still with some red hints, which is natural for the age that it is, but already quite beautiful. A lot of orangey color, brownish amber. And in the aromas, you start getting the nutty character. Also some orange peel, some plum. But then you start getting some walnut, hazelnut, and a little bit of a little touch of a young fruit also, a young red fruit still.
It is. It's lovely, and every time you go back, you get something else. It's almost got that almondy, marzipan-y thing going on in there. Some lovely kind of, almost like stewed red fruits. And then on the palate is so many layers, so much complexity there. You've got lovely acidity. You've got red fruit. You've got this nuttiness. You've got this it's almost like stewed, almost like it's like jamminess, but not that stickiness. It's not, it's not cloying at all. It's, and for the level of age, it's still beautifully fresh.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's something that we are really concerned about, is that we want to have elegant, fresh wine. So we have focus on the acidity, because in Porto, like I said before, we have a lot of alcohol. We have 19-20%. Here we have 20% here, right? And so we have to play with we have to have very good acidity to counterbalance all this, and then to make all the ingredients of the wine, so the alcohol, the sugar, the acidity, everything should be very well integrated, so that we don't have a cloudy wine, boring wine. So the port is it's wine, and it should be treated as wine.
Welcome back. Two very different ports.
Yeah, and two very different styles, and it's amazing that same grapes, same region, can create two vastly different drinks.
What do you think people at home will prefer?
I think it's going to be a bit of a mix and match. If the people at home are having this with a cheese board, probably the Tawny. The people who are sat there just having a little sip of it, probably the LBV.
Yeah, fair enough.
It is each their own.
So for those of you who are joining us for the very first time, we'd love to do this live. We normally do, obviously at Christmas, people are all going to do it. Some are going to do it the moment the kit is there and ready. Some are going to do it just a random night where they're free. Others will do it on Christmas Day. So we felt that doing it live was perhaps the wrong idea for the Christmas special. But we do normally do it live. We ask you for your tasting notes, and you get to vote on what you think are the favourites, rather than us just trying to guess. But what's your favourite?
I'm an equal opportunities wine drinker.
Oh, fair enough.
The thing is, it goes back to personal preference. If I was just going to sit and drink one of them now, the LBV. But if I was having food, probably the Tawny. And I sit a little bit on the fence, because I don't want to say that one is better than the other. It's like, what do you prefer, Chardonnay or Shiraz? It depends, doesn't it? There's so many different things. So I just think they both showcase what they're supposed to do very, very well. And I think that's what's important, is, giving a good example of what an LBV should look like, and giving a good example of what a 10-year Tawny should look like. Yeah. So people can make their own thoughts, their own judgments, and go, I like that now, rather than,
I think I could actually quite happily as well just drink a glass of that on its own. In fact, I'm almost tempted to do it. So, but yeah, no, both cool styles, but yeah, I just really like the Tawny. I just think that's my style. But each to your own, and find what you like. Now, do remember, there's an awful lot. Port's great value wine, isn't it? It's
absolutely.
For the amount of age and history and prestige, and also difficult techniques that have gone into making these wines. And these are all still foot stomped manually in these massive concrete tanks called lagars, aren't they? And people properly get in and they get a proper rhythm going, and it's a fun, joyful experience, sort of treading the grapes in the things. And that's a cool thing. You don't get that with your Aussie sticky wine. That's going to be much more machine made. You don't get that in most wines these days, frankly. And this is a wine where the style helps work with those kind of things, because of course it involves a lot of air contact compared to doing it in a pneumatic press that rotates around and juggles things up and gets really great yields. It's an old-fashioned style of wine. Yes, it is an old-fashioned style of wine. Does that mean it's bad? No, I think it's cool. Doesn't mean it's good. No, not necessarily.
These ones are, though.
These ones are, yeah. But yeah, good
Fantastic.
value wine, and you get certainly lots for your money. And unlike the sticky, unlike the Malbec, I think it's just its own style. And I'm glad it exists, and I want it to keep existing.
Fantastic. So should we move on to wine number 6?
We should. So the final wine of the night, very sadly, but we are going to America, which is a place that both Jamie and I are real fans of the wines of. And this is West Coast America, it's California, and it's a guy called Andrew Quady. We have featured some of his other wines in previous tastings, but that's because we like him and he's cool. And he's probably one of the only firework manufacturers to retrain as a winemaker.
That is probably right. Who knows? Who knows?
It's
Who knows?
true.
There's a lot of
Huge
people get into
true.
the wine
Huge
industry.
True, but yes,
Absolutely.
yeah.
So where we're here, this is a sweet vermouth. So this is Quady's via sweet vermouth. And the way we're making a vermouth is we start with a base wine.
Yep.
We fortify it, and then we're also adding a bunch of herbs and spices into it. So there's kind of almost like an infusion, the way that you do with a gin. That you're adding
this is the gin
your
of the wine world, isn't it?
botanicals into it. And we see, vermouth is used a lot of the time in cocktails. When you've got a martini, you can use dry vermouth, sweet vermouth, depending on the style of martini you're looking for. You can use vermouth in Manhattans and those kind of things. But it also is a really good just sipping it all by itself. So this particular one is made from grapes from California. There's some orange muscat in there. There's a grape called Valdepenas, which was a new one to me when I first started tasting this.
I don't know that
and
one.
then it's got some Tinto Roriz in there, which is
the pork grapes.
one of the pork grapes, which is also basically Tempranillo. Exactly.
Yes.
So, when you smell it's got, you can tell it's infused with these herbs and spices.
Yeah.
It's got this very medicinal characteristic to it.
Almost like, what's that green one that you like to bring back from?
Chartreuse.
Chartreuse, yeah.
It has got, that very kind of green, medicinal kind of thing. But then when you taste it, it's got this lovely sweetness about it. So you get that sweetness at the beginning of the palate, and then the herbs, they just kind of hang out at the end. You get that spice, that herb, that greenness, that kind of chewy grassiness. And if you like if you like those other medicinal kind of spirits, it's got that almost like Jägermeister feel.
I was going to say, this is almost a
kind of
post-skiing kind of drink, actually, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah. Proper, and because you've got those herbs and spices, it sits as that proper digestif kind of style.
Yeah.
But I think this is beautiful. You can drink it just in the glass over a little bit of ice. He also makes a dry vermouth, and I like a good cocktail of a 50-50 mix of the sweet and dry vermouth with a little bit of Angostura bitters.
Do you know what? If you have bought a Discover Series and an Adventure Series pack, you could make that cocktail, couldn't you? Because we've got the dry vermouth in the Discover Series. So
You're
take wine number one from
probably
that.
a bit late in the day to tell them on wine 6.
I suppose it depends which one we've gone for. But yeah, but if not, the bottles are available from our shop.
Absolutely.
But very, very cool wine. Weird, different, unlike anything else, because we're not used to the sort of wine is generally held up as this drink where the purity of the grape and the terroir, that it's supposed to be stuff that comes in from the roots, nothing else added, nothing taken away. It's just it's great. This is not that. This is a wine derived drink, and why shouldn't you? Why shouldn't you? It's not trying to talk of place. This is talking of a cocktail. It's talking of a recipe.
But you look at so many other things. Wine. Mm-hmm. You say it's purity of place, but we add yeast maybe from somewhere else. We add oak that comes from somewhere else. We decide we're going to leave the yeast in and do these things to add them.
Yeah.
So we've got that in wine. We then but on the other hand, you look at something like a beer. You go Bavarian beer laws that it's water, hops, yeast, barley, and that's it. Yeah. And that's what beer used to be, and that was what. But now you're seeing beer with,
coriander,
whatever flavour of the month it is. Orange peels, marshmallows, pineapple. There's
stuff that's using genetically modified yeast to develop certain esters, or
So I think there's no reason why this shouldn't be front and centre. There's purity of place, and there's purity of grape and purity of style. And if you're blind tasting, or you want to go, hey, I like a Chablis, or I like a Chianti Classico Reserve, or whatever, you have a certain level of expectation that style should drink like that style. Yeah. But what is there to say that we can't have a multi-vintage, multi-grape, multi-whatever wine that someone's decided to add coriander or black pepper or whatever they want to it?
Well, there's that company in the Napa Valley who are doing exactly that, and they started off doing craft beer. They moved into doing craft wines, and they're using some of those yeasts that were used in the beer world. They're doing things like the Merlot with cocoa nibs in to increase that chocolatey characteristic. It's a different drink. Is it for everyone? No. And plenty of people love that. The 19 Crimes aged with coffee in it, or done in rum barrels. It's not for me. I don't. But I'm not saying they shouldn't.
We're also seeing a lot of you know, fruit wines. People are making,
Yeah.
you know, these apple mists and blueberry wines and strawberries and,
Strawberry,
you know,
yeah.
Bonnie Doon strawberries and cream was, you know, one of the first wines that someone plugged onto me for a blind tasting when I was first getting into the wine industry. I'm like, it tastes like strawberries and cream. Yes, that's exactly what it is.
Congratulations.
So I think sometimes on, you know, at the level that we kind of talk about, we talk about all this kind of purity and sense of place and what it is.
Yeah.
But there are a lot of wines out there that are
They're just
being
something
made
else. Yeah.
in a different way, a different style, and
They're no less valid. They're just.
and that's why different wines are for different things and different occasions. And I just think this is really cool.
But I think, in terms of, I think, so why not start with a neutral spirit, like gin does? Like, you know, start with your unflavoured alcohol, and then just put in the bitters, put in your spices, your herbs, whatever you want to. I think you still get a lot of the characteristic of that, especially the orange muscat coming into that, and I think it adds something to it. I really do. It's floral and it's orangey.
It absolutely is. And if we take this in comparison to a gin, for example,
Yeah,
it's just adding the flavour earlier. Using the orange muscat is the equivalent of your neutral grain, but you want to take that characteristic. It's, you know, you take a whiskey, yeah?
yeah,
So a whiskey, you start with a certain characteristic, you know, and then you decide how much peat, how much oak, how much smoke, how much, you know, you want to do.
yeah. What kind of oaks and you know,
Exactly.
are you using an old sherry cask? And yeah, a lot of the whiskies that you see that are worth a lot more money use old barrels from the wine industry, and particularly from fortified winemaking.
A lot of port, a lot of sherry.
A lot of sherry, exactly. And because those bring in so much depth of flavour. But if you want a whiskey that's, you know, been aged in a port barrel or a sherry barrel, they're quite expensive these days, you know.
Absolutely.
In fact, there's this is a top tip. There is a big black market in sherry casks these days, because there's not as much sherry made and drunk each year as there are, and there's not enough spare barrels going out each year than there are whiskey distilleries wanting to take them. So there are all sorts of schemes about certifying that this barrel has been used for sherry manufacturing and everything. Some of them don't pay any attention to that. They just buy a barrel from the sherry region. It's never been anywhere near the drink at all, so it doesn't have any of the quality characteristics to it. But and equally, it could have had something like a Pedro Jimenez in it, which is so strongly flavoured that it's going to give that sweetness, the raisin character to the whiskey. And we did one of those at Quady, didn't we? About a year ago or so.
Yeah, absolutely. And just
So cool.
very cool, you know,
Absolutely
so.
unbelievable.
But I think we're digressing
Yeah.
slightly
Are we?
from standard from the vermouth. You know, this is pre-recorded. We should be able to not digress rather than our live whatever. But it is what it is.
Cut.
But yeah, but we see about 17% alcohol here. So it's the wine's made, it's then infused, then fortified up to 17%, and I just think it's once again. I'm guessing this is probably going to be a bit marmitey for people. There's going to be a love-hate relationship with this. And if you like those, once again, if you like those herbaceous flavours, that medicinal characteristic, it's absolutely epic.
I've seen some where they use the grains, the grape spirit, the brandy, or whether if you're assuming you're using a brandy, but most of them do. They infuse the herbs and the spices into the spirit first, because then the alcohol acts as a solvent to
bring
all
the stuff
those
out.
And then when that goes into the wine, it takes all the flavours with it. But yeah, it's ultimately you're flavouring the wine, which already was quite strongly flavoured in the first place, and
it is. With all these herbs, it doesn't feel as sweet as it is. This is 168 grams residual sugar in it, so it's it's like a sauterne. It's got the same level of sugar as a sauterne, but because of that bittering characteristics at the back of the palate, that you feel that kind of burn, that bitterness, that kind of Amaro-esque kind of feel about it. It feels very sweet on the tip of the tongue, but then the palate just helps it. There's other flavours, loads of sweetness, loads.
Huge
but as it runs around the palate, I go back to the B word.
Is he going to say balance? Isn't he?
Exactly.
Yeah.
But there we go. So,
but it is, and I think though where this would be out of balance is if you were to try to pair it with many foods. I don't think there's much that could stand up to a drink quite like this.
No, this is
and not be overpowered.
this is sipping, or potentially with an alcohol infused truffle kind of thing. So
Okay.
chocolate truffle with
Yep.
whiskey in it, but you want that whiskey flavour. So
Yeah.
I don't know if you go with it, but that's where I kind of see if it was paired like gin truffles and this, you could get away with. But this is definitely a sipping by itself as a digestif after dinner.
So would you have this a bit cold as well? Because it works at this kind of temperature.
So I'd have it cool. I wouldn't have it cold.
Yeah.
I think if you had it cold, you'd lose the fruitiness, and it would just be bitter. You just get that bitter burn, and that's all you get. So yeah, cool.
Like sort of 18 or something. Or...
16, 18, yeah, something like that would be ideal for it. So, but if you want to, this, you use it in the Manhattan, wouldn't you? Chill that down. So, it's, once again, it's down to each to their own, but there we go. But anyway, I think, I hope this has been fun.
Yeah.
I've enjoyed it. But,
what a year we've had. For those of you who've been with us since the beginning of the year, or even longer, we know we've got some of you who've been with us for 2 years. Thank you so much. We wouldn't do this without you guys having a great time drinking along with us. And it's if you've got any feedback on what you've liked, what you've paired with things, let us know. Drop us an email or chat to us on Instagram or Twitter or whatever it is these days.
Twitter.
Well, don't look at us on TikTok because we're not cool
Twitter.
enough. Yeah.
I don't know. Whatever the kids are doing.
Yeah, but let us know. Let us know what you'd love to do in the new year as well, because we will be going and visiting regions. We'll be doing some cool topics. We've got some really great ideas already. But if you've got some thoughts, let us know. And the other thing is that we've got this new cool technology on our new live stream thing, which will allow potentially some people who've, if you've spent an awful lot of time in this region that we're covering, why don't you let us know in advance and we can bring you in as a co-host?
Oh, yeah.
So
co-hosts.
Yeah.
Who wants to co-host? That's a good point.
You've got to have quite thick skin to try to co-host with him, I'll tell you that. But
or just be a little bit taller. But anyway, it's been an absolute pleasure. Whenever you're tasting this, drinking it, happy holidays, and we'll see you all in the new year. Cheers.
Santa baby, slip some Napa under the tree for me. I've been an awful good guy, oh Santa buddy, and hurry down that chimney tonight. Santa buddy, a case of shadow decan, for them. I'll wait up for you when, Santa buddy, you hurry down the chimney tonight. Think of all those tastings I've missed. Think of all that Burgundy I never sipped. Oh, next year I could be just as good if you check off my Christmas list. Santa Pally, I want some DRC to treat me, you see. I've been a sweetie all year, Santa buddy, so hurry down the chimney tonight. Santa buddy, one thing that I really do need, the key, oh, to Osclock's cellar. Santa Pally, so hurry down the chimney tonight. Santa buddy, fill my stocking with Pinot Noir ce soir. Could it be Premier Crew? Oh, Santa baby, so hurry down the chimney tonight. Come and trim my Christmas tree with some decorations bought in Puligny. I really do believe in you. Now let's see if you believe in me. Santa Poppy forgot to mention one little thing. Wine from Tring, they'll deliver to your home, Santa buddy. So hurry down that chimney tonight. Hurry down that chimney tonight. Oh, hurry down to Tring tonight.
Thank you so much for joining us. Have a wonderful Christmas, happy holidays, whatever you're celebrating, and we'll see you again in the new year.
Ho, ho, ho. Merry Christmas.
You're a ho, ho, ho.